Welcome back to the panel discussion, Federal Identity Governance, sponsored by RSA on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guest today is Peter Tran, General Manager and Senior Director, Worldwide Advanced Cyber Defense Practice at RSA. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy. Well, here we are in Washington, D.C. What happens in the White House is big news everywhere, and everyone's talking about a new executive order, and it's changed the landscape for federal information professionals. It includes an assessment of cyber risks at every agency. Today, agencies must thoroughly understand options they have for risk assessment.
We're in it. We're in it into that 90-day clock, right, John? I mean, to have that material gap assessment for every single agency for readiness, tall order, super tall order. But I'm going to be bullish on this one because I think the new executive order has teeth to it because it's calling for one of the most important elements is IT transformation, modernization. And that's going to be the anchor that's going to take us into the use of technologies like appropriate identity, lifecycle, and governance, early detection and monitoring, and continuous monitoring for that matter. We started with last administration, but this has a clock to it, and this has accountability to it. And I think that we're going to see a lot of movements in this first 90 days as far as an execution plan to do that. So I'm hoping for the best here.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere, and this includes a thorough assessment of where you're at right now. And there are agencies, I would imagine, that may not even have a handle on where all their servers are. Never mind all their IoT devices and smartphones and tablets. It's just a challenge in itself, just assessing what you have.
Well, kind of not to play on words, but makes you kind of want to cry. So when you had that,
that's too good.
I beat you to that, John, because that was a clear wake-up call because undiscovered devices across any network, let alone the federal government, is where something like that it's like playland to be able to hit a large network of undiscovered, unpatched, just aged infrastructure just sitting there, just lights blinking and connected.
To tell you the truth, Peter, I did cry when I read the biography of Edward Snowden by this guy named Epstein. I read this thing, and I was just shocked at what he did and what he got away with. He makes Reality Winner looks like a little Girl Scout compared to what he did. And we have to worry about identity management with contractors as well, not just federal employees.
Oh, yeah. When you talk about moving systems to the cloud, the AAA that we talked about and identity lifecycle becomes more complex. So in a Snowden case or any similar case where you have a third party that has rights into classified networks or otherwise unclassified, classified network, just sensitive data, let alone anything else, having one slight miss in authorization, access control, and an effective identity provisioning, that's what you're going to get. And so it's going to be low and slow, we call it. Low under the radar. You wouldn't even notice it until, bam, we have a notable case like Snowden. And it's not the end-all be-all. I mean, that just hit massive mindshare because of that one instance. We haven't even discovered yet, I suspect, the other cases that might be outliers, right? And that's where identity, lifecycle, and government starts to look at outliers and third-party risk.
And one concern was apparent by reading the book when it comes to federal identity governance was an individual who was working for a company, and he had some classifications that were very desirable. He could quit and get hired by another company in a matter of days and go into a different organization and retain some of those credentials he had. This is a whole new world for federal identity, isn't it?
Or better yet, you can go from one company to the next company in the same job and have the same privileges and have no need to know necessarily, but you retain it because it hasn't gone through the life cycle of deprovisioning based on governance standards.
Back to the life cycle argument here, isn't it? I
Yep.
mean, there's a life cycle to everything. There's a life cycle to APIs, there's a life cycle to software, and a life cycle to federal identity management as well. There must be.
100%. And it isn't rocket science to actually think about how to actually do it. The way it's done now is very, very much in isolation. So there's one core area that says, let's just look at access privilege. Then there's another core area. Let's just look at access control. And there's another area of authentication, and they don't talk. So the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, or the left foot and the right foot, and it starts to kind of feed upon itself. So it's effective federation and a unified platform.
Speaking of platforms, we had a gentleman by the name of Tony Scott who was pounding on the table and forcing people to move to the cloud. And this is an environment we have now. We mentioned cloud and authentication earlier, but this whole idea of moving to the cloud is going to challenge people, especially in an environment where you have different contractors and different players that are moving all the time.
Well, cloud can be a very beautiful thing, and Tony Scott, he came from that world, right? He was hoping to, and he brought some of that with him into that. But the clear challenge in cloud is when you migrate to the cloud, you have to think about your security as it's going into the cloud before it does. So appropriate independent validation and verification of your concepts of operations when you're going to migrate large networks in the cloud, and whether you're going to use a hybrid cloud environment or completely private. But security, so we want to have cost savings and we have capacity and scale. But what about security? Security becomes the outlier, and that's the danger. So when security becomes an outlier, everything else under the tenets of security, like identity, becomes a far removed outlier from there.
Back when you were in college, there was a rock band called Rush, and people are trying to rush to the cloud, but they should be very careful and consider federal identity governments before they make this big move to the cloud, shouldn't they?
Well, I wanted to be the bass player from Rush personally. So the bass player was steady, right? So what I'm saying is, when you make that decision to go to the cloud, be the bass player, take it steady, and make sure that identity, infrastructure, and security is built in to that decision.
A rock and roll star. That's just what RSA needs, huh?
That's exactly it.
I'd like to thank our guest today, Peter Tran, General Manager and Senior Director, Worldwide Advanced Cyber Defense Practice at RSA. I'm John Gilroy, Federal News Radio 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Federal Identity Governance.
On behalf of Federal News Radio, thank you for joining us. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.